All right. So good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. I want to welcome everyone.
Rachel Shilowitz is joining us.
That's right, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
We have Bruce Newman, Hyman, Tina, Gloria, Audrey, Phyllis, Lorraine, Ronnie, Rachel, Dinah, and Ruth. What a crew. So we're all there to study Torah. We have found new ways, of course, to study Torah during the past year virtually. The irony is last year on Shavuot, before the pandemic, we were supposed to have Rachel and her husband as our scholars in residence for Shavuot, but we had to cancel that. We look forward, God willing, to having both of you, God willing, in the future, in person at Agudath Sholom. But we felt this was a good way to get a taste of the Besser Torah coming to Stamford, Connecticut. Rachel currently teaches Tanakh and philosophy at Frisch, where she is also a department chair, a member of the guidance team. She's a graduate of Stern College, received her MA from Hunter College in English literature. She also spent time, I believe, in Israel teaching at MMY, correct? I hope that bio is correct. Okay. And Mashgicha Ruchanit, I'm going to put everybody on mute for a minute. Hold on. Mashgicha Ruchanit and Midrashet Torah Avodah as well. Besides her love of teaching, Rachel also enjoys creative writing and editing. She lives with her husband, Rabbi Donnie Besser, who is also a standout Talmud teacher at Mayanot. I credit some of my daughters' love of Gemara, and Diane's daughters as well. We're all here together with Rabbi Besser's teaching Torah. So the Besser family has a Shem Tov, and it's really wonderful to have you. Thank God, blessed with 5 children. Thank God. You can unmute yourself, by the way. Nod your head. Is that right?
Oh, we're up to 6.
You're up to 6. Old bio. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I should bless you with only.
Here's a new one.
Okay, Mazel Tov. With only wonderful things. I want to thank. Also, this is a really very special opportunity we have every year through adult education to have a woman as a scholar in residence for a series of classes. We're going to be doing 4 classes with Rachel, and the overall theme is Shivat Tzion. So we're looking forward to learning with you over the month. And I'm sure, God willing, the Torah that comes from your head and heart will, God willing, go into ours as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it.
I just want to chime in. I think this is either our 13th or 14th annual series consecutively.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's
Toby is not only
amazing.
the president, but one of the adult education inspirers. So thank you so much. And Rachel, you're up. So I'm going to put you on again. If you want to see Rachel fully, you can put it on speaker. I recommend that. And again, she can put the sources up on the screen, or it's also in the chat. Thanks.
Can everybody see it in the chat for anyone who came after I posted? I'm just gonna post it again in case anybody joined afterwards and wants to see, maybe print out the sources, but I'll be sharing it here and there. So I just want to say what an honor it is to be speaking here for this amazing shul in Stamford. Rabbi Cohen has been not only a parent of my husband's students, but a real inspiration to him and to me via his kids, who I've gotten to know pretty well. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I find it's a topic that I didn't even know about until I started learning it. It's so underlearned and it's so relevant. And it's so, like, you read these prakim in Tanakh and it feels like you're reading about today. So we're going to have 4 topics that are going to explore this time period, different slices of the time period. And hopefully by the time we finish, there'll be a real complete picture of this very engaging and this really messy redemption that we went through at the Second Temple period. Nothing came easy, nothing was simple. There's a lot of nuance. And because of that, it really speaks to our world today, where nothing comes easy and nothing's simple. So I wanted to start just by acknowledging that tonight is Yom HaShoah, and it's such a night with so much gravity to be speaking about the founding of the earlier state of Israel in the Second Temple period, when right now we're grappling with those concepts of Galut and Geula, of exile and redemption. And this movement from Yom HaShoah to Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut, over this week, there's so many strong emotions. So I always like to, with these emotions, I love to ground myself in the stories of Tanakh and see how those stories played out in our tradition. And it gives us a certain perspective on the history of the Jewish people and how continuous it is, and how these ideas repeat themselves, and how we grappled with Churban, with exile, with destruction. Churban Bayit Rishon destroyed probably the same percentage of our people, actually maybe even more than the Holocaust. They were just less people, but percentage-wise, it actually was more. There were very few people left after Churban Bayit Rishon who were exiled. So what we're really in this time period where the people have just experienced, the people that we're talking about, they've gone through trauma, they've experienced Churban, they've experienced loss of their homes, of their families, of the life that they knew. And the time period that we are going to be talking about is very new to them. It's something that they have not been prepared for in their old life. And I just think about my grandmother, who's a Holocaust survivor. She should live and be well. She's in her late 90s. She was in Auschwitz. And I think, there aren't that many Holocaust survivors around anymore to give us testimony and to bear witness. And she says to me all the time, I could have never imagined life in America. To see my great-grandchildren and to see my family thriving in America is a world that before the Holocaust, if only my father could see what it is, because we had there would be no way to wrap our minds up in the Carpathian Mountains what a life in America would look like. And we think and grapple with these ideas, and you think about the people at the time of Shivat Tzion are grappling with the same ideas, that sense of loss, the loss of everything I knew, the loss of everything familiar, this terrible trauma, this terrible destruction of my people. How do I go and rebuild? What does that look like? What issues does it bring up in our lives? So that's right where we are. And it just seems so appropriate to start our journey on Yom HaShoah, and God willing, next week to continue our journey on the eve of Yom HaAtzmaut. So I guess with that, I'd like to dive right in. And I'd like to dive in actually to the time period that precedes the building of the Second Temple, even a little bit before the redemption. And I'd like to dive into the mindset of the people who have gone through Churban about 50 years earlier. They've lost the Beit HaMikdash. They've been thrown out of their country into the tidal wave of Babylonia, where they were oppressed, but not terribly oppressed, and not as much as it was before, not when they were living through the Churban. And what were they thinking about their redemption? What were they imagining what their Mashiach was going to look like? And we actually get a window into their mindsets, not through their story, but we get a window through a parak of Tehillim. And it's a parak that's very familiar to a lot of people because we say it every Shabbat. Now, I just want to take a step back and say, I love audience participation, and we're a small, intimate group here. So anyone who has anything to say, please say it. But I'd like to just kind of throw a question out at you. And if you feel comfortable answering, please feel free. What do you think they imagined when they were living there in Babylonia and they knew that the prophet Jeremiah had promised them a redemption? What do you think they thought the redemption looked like? Anyone have any ideas, any thoughts? If it were you and you were thrown into Galut and you lost the Beit HaMikdash, but you knew there was going to be another one because your Navi, your prophet, told you there was, what would you imagine that redemption would look like?
Not necessarily going back to Jerusalem.
Oh, that's so interesting. Maybe not necessarily going back to Jerusalem, where maybe you came from and maybe you didn't. Such an interesting point. Anyone else? Thank you for being the brave one to start us off.
I
I
Yeah.
might have thought about it magically because it was such a huge tragedy. I might have thought it's just God's going to create it for us without our hand through a
Oh,
miracle.
that's so interesting. I love that word that you use, magically. Now, I thought it would be like magic, like this magical experience. And if you would think that, you would have a lot of historical backing to your thought. Did anyone know why? Because we actually have
All
been
of
reading.
Egypt,
What's that?
all of Egypt was
Right.
all magic.
Egypt was kind of magical. We just came from the Pesach Seder, and we talked about the Makot, and we talked about, we had Kriyat Yam Suf. I don't know if did anyone decorate their dining rooms like the splitting of the sea. I saw some pictures that people were passing around. Right, we split the sea. The walls stood up. The sea world stood up like water. It was magical. It's like we glided there on a magic carpet. So you can imagine, actually, just in our group. Anyone else have any ideas? What might you think it would be like? Ruth Aminoff, are you trying to speak? Because you're muted.
Ruth, you're muted.
Let me see if I could unmute her. Oh, there we go.
God performed all these miracles to take them out of Mitzrayim, okay? And once they built the ark, in the sanctuary, in other words, they contribute something. So my feeling is that it has to come from the people, their energy. You can't expect God to do everything. In other words, it's our time to be active and to try to initiate things. We can't expect God. God did it for 40 years until we were weaned from it. And once we took upon ourselves to do something, that I think that's very interesting. Even today, I think one cannot wait for miracles. One has to be active and help to do it. You understand?
So a really incisive comment. And so far now we've had, 3 visions of what it might be like to be redeemed. It's as if you ask, somebody, what's your first job going to be like? You're going to get like 5 or 6, ask any, high school kid, what's your first job going to look like? And some will say, oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be my dream job. I'm going to make a fortune and I'm going to find meaning and I'm going to love it. And some people will say it's going to be like probably an entry-level position. It might have some drudgery. People have different dreams. They have different ideas. And the people in Bavel were dreaming also. They were dreaming about their redemption a lot because they didn't love the life that they had. They wanted to go back to Israel. And they composed a poem. And the poem goes like this: Shir Hamalot, Beshuv Hashem et Shivat Tzion, Hayunu Kechomim. And here you have just the name of this time period, Shivat Tzion, the time period of returning to Zion. We were like dreamers. Az Yimales Chopinu. We were like dreamers. Then our mouths were filled with song. Ushonenu Rina, and our tongues had laughter on them. Az Yomru Goyim Igdil Hashem La'asot Imela. It will be said amongst the nations, Hashem has done great things with these people. And we acknowledge in verse 3, Igdil Hashem La'asot Imanu. Hayunu Smechim. Hashem has done great things to us. We are so joyous. We are so happy. Shuva Hashem et Shivitenu. Ka'afikim ba'negev. Hashem, return our captives like flash floods in the desert. I don't know if anyone has ever gone hiking in the winter in Israel, but you actually have to check on the special hotline if there's going to be flash floods, because there are, and they come extremely quickly and they go away quickly because there's no friction and the water just shoots by in the desert. And that's how fast we want our redemption to be, or that's how fast we think our redemption will be. That's what we dream about. And then you get to verse 5, Pasuke, and the tone changes. And it says, in a very different manner, Hazor in bedima, berina yiksoru. Those that plant with tears will reap with joy. Haloch yelech uvacho. Somebody's walking along and crying. No se mesha chazara, carrying the seed bag. Bo yavo berina, no se alumot will eventually come back with joy, holding on to the sheaves with the produce that have grown from the ground. Now, we recognize this because we say it on Shabbat before we bench. But what's the expectation here? What are people thinking about when they're going back to Zion? What are they imagining? So actually here, I don't know if anyone noticed, everything that you said in your comments are reflected here in this parak of Tehillim, because actually there are two voices. There are two thought processes going on. On the one hand, you have the first one, which is Aleph to Daled. And Aleph to Daled says, we're going to be like dreamers. It's going to be a dream. Our mouths are going to be filled with laughter, our tongues with song, and other nations will even realize how wonderful it is for us. Hashem, we want it back fast. And you just notice this idea of who's going to do the redemption. It's going to be God. God will swoop down. He'll reach out to us. He'll take us back in a miraculous way. It will be almost like a dream-like, because it will be so quickly. And you have this main image here of the dreamer. And the dreamer, everything is going to be so wonderful. And then another voice pops up and says, wait a second, how do you know it's going to be like that? Yes, Yetziat Mitzrayim was like that. And just notice the water imagery, the fast, the quickness of the water imagery, and all the imagery around the word happiness. Just I'll highlight them, but look at all these ways that they say happy here. Schok, Rina, Smechim. It's going to be so joyous. And then in the second half, the water imagery changes completely. And what is it? Anyone notice it? Do you notice the water imagery? Instead of a flash flood, what do we have?
Weeping.
Yeah, it's the tears are the water. It's not quick. It's actually drop by drop, and it comes with hardship. And we have it twice, dim'ah and bacho, tears and crying. And instead of just happiness, we have a very different imagery. And the imagery that we have is that of a farmer. We have the hazorim, one who plants, right? Here, there's the zorim, one who plants. Here's yiktsoru. There's meshach hazarav, carrying the seed bag. And then you have the alumotav. There's also happiness here, but it's a very different happiness. So here's also, there are words of happiness. You have Rina over here and Rina over here, but it's a very different happiness. It's a happiness that comes from crying. It's a happiness that comes at the end of a process. It's a happiness that you did the work, and it was hard work, and it was painful work, and therefore you can appreciate your progress afterwards. So when we look at this parak of Tehillim that seems to be said during the time of the Galut, and you think about, people have different expectations of what the Galut is going to, what the Geulah, the redemption is going to be like. And you have one group of people that says, God is going to reach out to us. And we are going to be passive, and God will be active. Everything will be dreamlike, and it will be amazing. And then you have another voice that pops up and says, no, we have to reach out to God. It's much more similar to a farmer and our agricultural life, where things take time. Haloch yelech. There's a process here. We have to carry that seed bag. We're going to cry, and it will be our tears that will water the seed. They won't grow unless we cry, unless we have hard work, unless we have backbreaking tragedy. It's not going to happen. And you could just imagine the conversations that were happening on street corners. People are thinking like, when's our redemption going to come? And people are like, well, I guess, we're going to know it when it comes. Because wouldn't you know it if it was the makot? Wouldn't you know it if it was the blood on the doorpost? Wouldn't you know it? And then the next voice is saying, I don't know, maybe we have to start it. Maybe it's going to happen because we did something, and it's not going to happen to us, but it will happen with us. Yes. Ron. Yes.
It sounds to me almost like the controversy as to whether or not the current Medinat Yisrael is Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, or whether we have to sit and wait for Mashiach, which is the attitude of a different strand of Judaism, was Zionism, as I understand it.
Okay, so remember I told you that everything we are gonna say in this class, we're gonna say, like, oh my gosh, is it talking about our time? Like, how could this be, 2,000 years ago when it seems like it's happening today? So that's actually the introduction to our fourth class. once we finish the time period, thank you. I promise I didn't. She's not a ringer. I didn't bring her along. But
Thank you.
that's what we're going to examine. Our fourth class, once we look at 3 different time periods, Zerubbabel, Haggai, and Zechariah, and Ezra, we're going to talk about how these visions of Shivat Tzion are playing out in our day. And we're going to talk about some of the religious Zionist philosophies, some of the more Hasidic philosophies, and we're also going to talk about Messianism, Mashiach, and how it's all based on this time period and how people think about this time period.
Rachel,
Yes.
as you were reading the Shir HaMalot, couldn't help it came to mind that the last line of it could be Im tirtzu ein zu Agudath.
Mhm.
And
Isn't that fabulous?
yeah,
And
it just kind of follows, after all this, if you dream all that's in Shir HaMalot, if you wish it, if you work toward it, it's not a dream, it's real.
what a beautiful comment, Phyllis. And actually, that is the reason why this parak was one of the finalists for the anthem of the state of Israel instead of Hatikvah. It didn't win, but everyone it's an honor to be nominated. So let's look at what actually does happen at the time. And as you can imagine, it's not going to be simple because, you grow up in a Jewish community, nothing's simple. So we had very strong opinions on both sides in the Jewish community. And when the redemption was going to come, not everyone was even going to agree that it was a redemption. So what happens? It's in the first year of Cyrus the Great. Now, Cyrus the Great was absolutely unprecedented in the ancient world because what he did was he let his captives go. He let his captured people go back to their homelands and build their temples to their gods. Now, this had never been done. Assyria tortured their captives and Babylonia oppressed their captives. They didn't torture them, but they oppressed them. And suddenly you have this person, Cyrus, that makes this declaration and he says, everybody, and we found this actually is this unbelievable archaeological find where they found a copy of it. It's like the first Declaration of Independence, and it says everybody can go back to their land. It's the first Liberty Bell, and they can build temples to their gods. And in fact, I want you to, because Cyrus is a polytheist and he wants people. He believes in all the gods. He believes that gods should be worshipped in their own land. They have their own lands and their own temples. And if you worship your God, then those gods will petition my God, Marduk, and Marduk will be good to me. So Cyrus feels that it's in his religious best interest to let everyone go and worship their gods. And completely unprecedented. Nobody ever did that. When you captured someone, you either forced them to worship your God, or you left them alone and oppressed them and taxed them very heavily. But this idea of going back is dangerous because once people get back to their land, they might become nationalistic and they might fight you. So it's a very crazy thing. You might even say a miraculous thing that Cyrus did, or you might not. So what happens? It's in the first year of Cyrus's reign. I'm not going to read it inside, but everyone who has a source sheet, please feel free to read. And Cyrus makes a declaration and he says, anybody who wants to go, any nation who wants to go back should go, and specifically the Jews should go back to their land and build a temple to their God. Now this is fascinating because he says the following: anybody who is from the Jewish people should go back to Jerusalem and build a temple to your God. He is the God who lives in Jerusalem. Remember, that's Cyrus's polytheist mentality that gods live in certain places. So therefore you have to go. But then he says in the next pasuk, but you don't have to. Anybody who remains, it wouldn't be a good Jewish tale if there wasn't also an appeal. So he says, if you don't want to go, you should give money to the people who do go, because they're going to need the money to build this temple. It's quite a large building project. But what you see here is there's a choice. This is no Yetziat Mitzrayim. Yetziat Mitzrayim had no choice. You either died in Makat Choshech or you left. no pardon say, you could go if you want to. And the Jews said, well, I'm not sure. Like, maybe I'll stay as a slave, or maybe I'm going to go. There's no choices involved. Hashem's telling you, you have to take a set. You have to take a lamb and tie it to your doorpost. And suddenly there's a choice. And as any good choice, some people decide to go and some people decide to stay. Now, how could it be that people decided to stay? Over here in Pasuke, we have the people who left, the heads of the family for Yehuda and Benjamin and Levium and anybody whose heart was enlightened by God. And in Pasuk Vav, we have the people who stayed. The people around them, they strengthened their hands. They helped them out with money, with possessions, with animals, etc. So how could you not go? How could it be that Cyrus says, you've been dying to go to Israel, and now you're saying, not so interested. I changed my mind. Could you imagine if there was a long lost relative, a long lost sister or brother? Actually, this happened after the Holocaust, where people lost each other, and then you found that person. How fast would you be on a plane to get to where they were? How fast would it be if it was your child, it was your sibling? You would spend any amount of money and you would try to go the next day. These are people who were longing for Jerusalem, for longing for Eretz Israel, and suddenly you have a people who don't go. And if you follow this through in the second chapter, you have a list of people who, I'm going to just skip over here, the list of people who went with Zerubbabel, and the list, and we have a number of how many people here. Here it is. Kol hakahal ke'achad arba ribo alpaim shalosh me'ot v'shishim, 42,360. Now this sounds like a decent number, but we know it's actually a pretty small fraction, and we know that from the Purim story, because that happened to the people who stayed in Persia, and we know there were a lot of them far-flung in all different countries. Actually, Israel's not even mentioned as a footnote in the Purim story, but there was a congregation in Israel at the time. So it wasn't enough people. It wasn't a lot of people. It seems to be that most people stayed. Now, people stayed probably for two main reasons. Number one comes from actually a source in Theodore Herzl's The Jewish State. And Theodore Herzl says that nothing has ever been able to hurt the Jews. No nation on earth has endured such struggles and sufferings as we have, and yet oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. Look, we're still here. And there's only one thing that has been able to hurt us, and that is wherever we remain politically secure for any length of time, we assimilate. I think this is not praiseworthy. And Herzl was speaking to the people of his time. He was saying to them, you feel really good here in wherever you are, Austria, Germany, Poland, any of your countries, but you can't feel good. Your true home is in Palestine, and they won't be able to get you by oppression, but they will be able to get you by assimilation. And that was probably one reason why people did not want to leave Persia, because their lives were good and they started to assimilate. And the dream of Israel died out with the people who had seen the land of Israel. It was their homeland, but my kids grew up in America. My kids grew up in France. That's not their homeland anymore. This is what they know. This is the language they speak. And now you want me to go to a land that has no infrastructure, that has no economy, and I'm going to build roads, and I'm going to build buildings there with sand. That's not going to happen. That's not for me anymore. And that perhaps was one reason why people didn't go. Another reason, perhaps, that people didn't go is what we read in the Shir HaMalot, because they said, well, this can't really be the redemption, because it doesn't look like a redemption. A redemption looks like Yetziat Mitzrayim. A redemption looks like Hayinu Kechomim, Ka'afikim Ba'negev. A redemption looks like all the other nations are going to say how wonderful it is that God has done great things for you, Jewish people. I don't know, this doesn't look like it. Cyrus is telling me that I have to go, but it's like going to be hard, so I have to collect money to go on this journey. You know what? I'd rather not collect money, and I'd rather stay here. I have my family here, my business here. And you know what? I'm sure the redemption will come eventually. And when it comes, I'll go. And God will show his face. And I will know that that's what the redemption is like. And a lot of people stay in Persia. And suddenly you have this new entity in the Jewish community called the Diaspora. That had never happened before. Not that every single person had lived in Israel before. I'm sure there were travelers who went to Alexandria and stayed there, but in order to do some type of trading. But you never had a community that chose to live outside of Eretz Yisrael until now. And this is something new that the people have to start to navigate. What does it mean to be Jewish? Because before it meant to live in Israel and live with miracles and know that you're Jewish. And now suddenly, well, I don't know. Do we have to live in Israel to be real Jews? Is there something missing if we don't? What if we don't live in Israel, but we follow Hashem? What if we keep the mitzvot? What if we can keep the mitzvot better if we live outside of Israel? These were all conversations at the time because it's the first time that this reality existed. So anyway, the 42,000 people go with Zerubbabel, and things are not smooth as you can imagine, because this is not a miraculous redemption. This is a naturalistic redemption. This is the redemption of the farmer. He's holding that bag, but he's watering those seeds with his tears, and we know it's not going to be smooth. So what happens to Zerubbabel on his way? So first things first is that I'm going to get back to this. Okay, first things first is that Zerubbabel gets to Israel and everybody wants to start to build the Beit HaMikdash. Now, that's all well and good if you want to start to build the Beit HaMikdash, and everybody, I don't know if anyone's done any big planning here. Has anyone here done, been in charge of like the dinner or run an event that took a ton of planning? So, right, when you have I don't know if you can relate to this, but whenever I run against you, there's like a committee, and the committee sits down and everybody wants to have a great dinner. Everyone wants to have a wonderful event. And we all, we nod our heads and we want a wonderful event. And we also want it to be very successful. And everyone can agree that they want a successful event. And then suddenly we have to talk about the details, and we have to talk about, well, what makes a successful event, and what are we buying, and what are we spending money on? And suddenly, oh, wait a second, now everyone has different opinions of how we should run this event. And then there could be sometimes discord in terms of the planning committee. And now imagine you're building a Beit HaMikdash, and you're not necessarily a wealthy country. You're not in a wealthy country. You have to also build your houses, and you have to build your businesses and roads. So this is going to get very messy, and the people don't agree on how they should build their Beit HaMikdash. So you have one group of people that says, wait a second, let's just build the Beit HaMikdash, however it is. Like, let's use whatever resources we have. And then another group of people says, no. The Beit HaMikdash looks like something. It looks like the Beit HaMikdash, meaning we've had one before, and this is what it looked like. So they send out money and they hire people from Tzur. Tzur is like, it's higher. That's where it's in Upper Lebanon. And they have wonderful trees. If you're, the flag of Lebanon has a tree on it because they have wonderful cedar trees. That's why the Arab Spring in Lebanon was called the Cedar Revolution. So they hired people from Lebanon, workers, to get Lavi Atzeh Harazim min HaLebanon, to bring us cedar trees from Lebanon to build our Beit HaMikdash. Now that sounds like a wonderful idea, because of course you should have cedar trees if you build your Beit HaMikdash. The problem here is that we're not living in a miraculous redemption, and therefore we don't have money for cedar trees. We don't have the means to build the Beit HaMikdash that Shlomo had. We have the means to build a very different, smaller Beit HaMikdash. And to add insult to injury, Bayit Sheni was missing 5 very important things that Bayit Rishon had. Number one, they were missing the Aron. And it's just like, what's a Beit HaMikdash without the Aron? Like, the Kruvim turned to each other on Yom Kippur. That only happened in Bayit Rishon. What does it mean to not have the Urim V'Tumim, the breastplate that the Kohen wore, that they used to consult before they went to war? That only happened in Bayit Rishon, in the first Beit HaMikdash. They didn't have it in the second Beit HaMikdash. They didn't have the Amud Eish, that pillar of fire that came up from the Korban. They didn't have the Ner Tamid. They didn't have the everlasting flame. They basically didn't have anything that was miraculous, that was a direct connection with God, that could tell them God is here. And they also lost at the same time something else that was crucial. They lost prophecy, which died out with Bayit Rishon. And they haven't had a prophet since Yechezkel, who was around this time, but wasn't their prophet right now. So they're going in blind. They don't have the decision-making mechanisms that they had in the past. Because in the past, if you had a really, really big question, a halachic question, a question about your life path, you could actually go and ask a prophet. Now, the prophet might not know, because he might or she might not get that prophecy, but you could ask. And if you need to know if the land of Israel should go to war, you went to the Kohen Gadol and you asked the Urim V'Tumim. And all of that is not available to you anymore. And actually what happens is, and the people don't know what to do about that. What's our new life like? This is totally new. How do we make this decision of how to build the Beit HaMikdash? Should we try to copy the first one? But it's not the first one. So what do we do in this new life? And this issue brings up so many problems, because this is a life that we have to learn. This is a life that we have to get used to. And I just want to show you some of the problems that come up from transitioning into a new time period. So number one is what happens at the dedication ceremony of the Beit HaMikdash. So there's this huge ceremony, and they have their cedar trees, and they're stacked up in the corner, and they have the ceremonial shovel, with the ribbon around it, and they have, the big red tape, and they have this confetti, and they set up the Levium, and they're blowing the chatzotrot, they're blowing the trumpets. And everybody is shouting, and they're saying, Hodu Lashem ki tov, ki liolam chasto. Hashem is so great. Thank you, Hashem, for what you've done for us, that we can now establish the second Beit HaMikdash. And Rabbi Mea Kohanim, v'haLeviyim, v'roshei ha'avot hazikenim, asher ra'u et habayit harishon biyasto, zeh habayit be'ineihem, bochim b'kol gadol. A very important segment of the population, which is the heads of the families, many of the priests and many of the Levites who had actually seen the first Beit HaMikdash. So that would put them in their 60s or 70s. And they remember what the Beit HaMikdash looked like. They remember a time where they had Nevuah. They remember a time where they had the Urim V'Tumim. They remember a time where the Beit HaMikdash was grand, that it was built of gold and silver and cedar and marble. And they remember a time where they had the Aron. And they look at this new Beit HaMikdash, and they reflect on their lives and their new time period, and they start to cry. They start to weep bitter tears at their fate. And could you imagine? They're dedicating the second Beit HaMikdash. They are the ones who went. These aren't the ones who stayed. These are the ones who went, and they start to cry. And Rabim, B'tru'ah b'simcha, but other people, the farmers, they're happy. This is what they expected. They didn't expect it to be wondrous and easy and miraculous. They knew they were entering a new time period. And they both raise their voices, and they're crying and they're laughing, and there's the trumpets. And the parak ends with Ein ha'am makirim kol tru'at hasimcha v'kol bechi ha'am. The people can't even, they don't even realize who's crying, who's laughing. The sounds merge together. There's no resolution here. Because what are you supposed to say to the people that are disappointed at the building of the Beit HaMikdash? What do you say to the people who are losing their dream? And there's internal conflict in Bnei Israel, even the ones who went to Israel, because they're not on the same page with what it's going to look like. And that's one issue that comes up with this change. And another issue that comes up happens along the way, and it happens to some of the Kohanim. And the Kohanim, they come, and they're coming to Israel. I'm back in Parak Bet in the second chapter, and they're coming to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, but some of the Kohanim have a problem. And these Kohanim have a problem that they don't have something called lineage documents. Now, we don't we don't work with lineage documents anymore, so it's not really something from our world. But imagine that you were a Kohen, you actually had to prove, I guess, well, now, you know, with the vaccine, and you have to prove where you live, and you have to prove you're a first responder or a teacher, or in the healthcare profession. So now we're suddenly, you know, we're used to bringing our documents places, but they had to have documents to prove that they were Kohanim, that they could work in the Beit HaMikdash. So they would have these lineage documents, and by Rishon, they probably didn't have to show them because it was passed down from father to son, and everyone knew who the Kohen families were. You couldn't just show up at the Beit HaMikdash and say, hi, I know I was never here before, but I really am a Kohen. But now everything's all mixed up. So you have this group of people who can't find their lineage documents. They don't have it. They look for them, but they can't find them. So what do? What do you do with a group of people who say they're Kohanim, but they don't have lineage documents? And you think about this just today. And, you know, what do you do with somebody who says they're X, but they can't prove it? They say they're converted, but they don't have conversion documents. They say they're married, but they don't have marriage documents. You know, what do you do? So in the olden days, what would you do? How would you answer this problem during Bayit Rishon? What would a person do? Kohanim who say they're Kohanim but don't have lineage documents.
Would ask the Urim V'Tumim.
You would ask the Urim V'Tumim, exactly. You would go to the Kohen. You would say, here is this family, the Bnei Barzilai. They say they're Kohanim, but they can't prove it. Are they Kohanim? And Hashem would answer, Cain or Lo. But now they don't have the Urim V'Tumim because we've fallen into a time period that's between two systems. We used to have the Nevuah system, and we haven't developed the halachic system yet. We don't know what it means to go ask a rabbi. That's not something that we've done yet. So they go and they ask an officer and they say, what should we do? So they go to Hatir Shata, the officer, and Hatir Shata says to them, Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadoshim adamod kohen l'urim v'tumim. I cannot allow you to eat kudshim. I can't allow you to eat from the korbanot. It's navera if you're not a kohen. You can't just go and do the avoda. You can't work in the Beit HaMikdash until a kohen stands before the Urim V'Tumim. I have a problem. And my answer has to be no, not because I don't believe you that you're Kohanim, but because I have no way of establishing it. We're in this gray area now. And this is a second issue that Zerubbabel had to navigate, this religious uncertainty. So he has this kind of internal uncertainty, and he has amongst his people a religious uncertainty. And then a fourth uncertainty comes up in Perek Dalet. And the fourth and really hardest uncertainty comes from a group of people that we call the Tzarei Yehuda, the enemies of Judah. They probably did not call themselves the enemies of Judah. They had their own name for themselves, but we call them the Tzarei Yehuda because that's what they ended up being. And this group of people, probably the Samaritans, who live in the north, they come and they have a very interesting request of Zerubbabel. So they start, they had their dedication ceremony. It didn't go as planned, but okay, they're still going to build the Beit HaMikdash. They're still going to hold on, and they're going to persevere because it only is going to come through difficulties. And they come to Zerubbabel and they say to him, Nivnei imachem. We don't want to hurt you. We want to join you. We want to build with you. We want to help you. Now, just imagine this is a people who doesn't have enough money to build the Beit HaMikdash. This is a people with internal discord. This is an answer to prayers, right? Here you go. There's people they want to donate. You can't turn away people who want to help. This is free labor. And they go on and they say, Kikachem nitrosh le'elokechem. We also serve your God. We serve the same God as you. And we have been, we have been serving God since the time of Assyria. So now we're going back over 100 years. Assyria mixed people up in the world, and they exiled the 10 tribes and they brought non-Jews in. And if you read the story of non-Jews, you find out that they do serve Hashem, and they also serve idolatry. They had never gave up their idolatry, but they did start to serve Hashem. So now let me ask you, you're Zerubbabel. What do you do? What are some of your considerations? Would you let them help or would you not? Remember, you can't ask the Urim V'Tumim and you can't ask a Navi. So you just have to figure it out. What would you do? Anyone have any thoughts? I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Okay, so raise your hand if you would allow them to help. You would allow them to join the process of building the Beit HaMikdash. Why would you allow them to join, Toby?
Because we need the money.
Hey, we need their help. We need the money, right? It would actually answer a lot of the
And
problems.
maybe, and also maybe it's a kiruv thing.
Okay.
That, if they feel more part of the community and in partnership, that they will leave behind the idolatrous ways and totally become part of us.
Right? Absolutely. Maybe they'll convert. I mean, they're not Jewish, but maybe they'll, leave aside their idolatry and want to design mitzvot b'nei Noach. There's also a danger if you don't let them join, which is they can be insulted and then they can try to undermine you. So, they're your neighbor. What if they wage war against you if you don't let them? Who would not let them join? Why not? Do you want to say? You have to say. You don't want to say? Anyone else? Anyone would not let them join? I want to say why not? Hey, Rachel?
Well, if they practice idolatryism, I don't know what the noun is, then they might influence members that don't practice that. That would be my fear. And they would try to convince people to pray to idols.
Okay, and that's a real danger. We're building the Beit HaMikdash here. Can we allow people in on the beginning processes who don't worship the way that we do, that they worship Hashem, but also they worship idolatry? What will happen to the Beit HaMikdash? Will they influence people? Now, barring what Zerubbabel did, I just want to point out that he doesn't know what to do. This is not easy. He has to make a decision, and it's one of the first times where you have to make a decision without Hashem's guidance. And Zerubbabel does what he thinks is best. It's definitely a good thing to do. And Zerubbabel says, no, we cannot let you join. He says to them, I'm sorry. Lo lachem v'lanu livno bayit le'Elokeinu. We can't do it together. We cannot join with you. You're idolaters. Ki anachnu yachad nivneh laHashem Elokei Yisrael. Because we can only do it ourselves. And then he puts in a little phrase, and you just realize that he has political considerations also. He says, Kasher tzivanu hamelech Koresh. Koresh didn't command you, he commanded us. So don't be offended, because we're really just trying to follow Koresh's decree. You think it works? Of course not. They're incredibly offended. And what do? They send lobbyists to Cyrus. And they tell Cyrus, those Jews in Israel, they're trying to rebel against you. And they do it for years and years. And Cyrus believes them. And he withdraws his permission to build the Beit HaMikdash. Now, what's fascinating, and that's really, we're ending the story here. But let's talk about this time period. So number one, we have this really interesting Gemara. And the Gemara says, Ad yavor amcha Hashem. Zobia Rishona, until the people pass by. This is a quote from Az Yashir. This is talking about the first time they came to Israel. Ad Yavoram Zukanita, when your nation passed by, Zobia Shnia. This is the second time they came to Israel, in the time of Ezra. Kan Amru Chachamim. Therefore, the sages teach, Ru'uyin hayu Yisrael le'asot lahem nes b'mei Ezra, kederach shanasa lahem b'mei Yeshua ben Nun. They should have gotten miracles at this time the way they got it when Yoshua brought them in a miraculous way, crossing the Jordan River and fighting the 7 nations. But they didn't get it, shegaram hachet, because they sinned. And what is this sin that they did? So the Marsha explains, shalo alu kulam. The reason they didn't get the miracles is because they didn't all go. Now you just think about it yourself. They didn't go because they didn't have the miracles, and they didn't have the miracles because they didn't go. And the Gemara in Yuma says it explicitly, that the Gemara in Yuma says, if you would have made yourselves like a wall, meaning if you would have all come at once, alitem kolchem bimei Ezra, then nimshaltem kekesef she'ein rekev sholipo, you would have been like silver that can't get rotted. But because you came, kidzelatot, you came little by little like doors, you're like cedar which can get rotted. There was a problem with the Jewish community in Persia that they were waiting for their miracles. There was a problem that they were saying, well, this can't be our redemption. Our redemption has to happen just in one particular way. And if it doesn't happen like that, then it's not my redemption. My redemption looks better than this. And Rav Soloveitchik talks about this in his essay, Kol Dodido Fake, and he compares the people of his time in the 1950s for not making Aliyah to go to Israel to the people of Shivat Tzion. And he compares both of them to the woman in Shir HaShirim who has this beloved that she's been waiting for years. And then suddenly he knocks at her door and he says, it's so strange, but look at this. There's this tragic hesitation on the part of the love-intoxicated, anxiety-stricken lover when the opportunity, couched in majestic awe, presented itself. Suddenly her beloved is there. And then for some reason, her heart hardens and she doesn't open the door. And she says, I'm tired. I've already put on my pajamas. I've already washed my feet. I can't get up and open the door. Something happens to us. You know, this is true. The truth is I find this happens to us as people all the time, that like something good happens and suddenly you're like, no, I don't want that yet. I don't know. I'm gonna like, it's too good. I want to wait. And he says, that's the story of the woman in Shir HaShirim, where her beloved is knocking on the door and suddenly she doesn't want to open it. And then the mood passes and she says, oh yes, I'm going to open the door. And she goes to open the door and her beloved is not there anymore. And he says, this is the story of people and now our state of Israel, where it's here. Just open the door, just come. And the Rav calls out the Anglo communities and says, just open your door. Don't miss your opportunity. And this time period of Shivat Tzion seems to be teaching us this idea of what does it mean to have something that you don't expect? What does it mean to have a redemption that's not the redemption that you either thought would happen or wanted? And there's this beautiful essay. I really encourage everyone to look it up and read it. It's called Welcome to Holland. And it's written by have you read it? It's written by a mother who has a child with special needs. And the mother said, I want to tell you what having a child with special needs is like. It's like planning for your lifelong trip to Italy. And you are so excited to go. This is your vacation of a lifetime. So what do? You buy guidebooks, you start to learn the language, you talk to people, you join Facebook groups. What's it like in Italy? You plan your trip so carefully, and finally you pack and you get new luggage and you get on the plane and you hear a voice over the loudspeaker, welcome to Holland. And you say, Holland? I'm not going to Holland, I'm going to Italy. And she says, you know what? You have two options at that point. You could spend your whole trip in Holland thinking about the fact that you should have been in Italy. And you can not look at the sights and you could not enjoy 1 minute of it. Or you can say to yourself, you know what? Holland is a nice place too. And I never meant to end up here. And you can mourn that you didn't get to Italy. And that can be something that's painful and that stays with you. But if you never appreciate what Holland is, then you will have missed out. And the people, Zerubbabel is dealing with the people who want to be in Italy. They want Yetziat Mitzrayim. The people who are with him, they know it's going to be hard, but how hard? And then it's hard in so many ways. It's hard religiously. It's hard because we don't know the answers to our questions. It's hard because internally we have different expectations of our lives and we don't have a Navi to solve it. So we need to now solve it ourselves. It's hard because we have people from the outside that are coming in that are threatening us and we don't know how to deal with them because are they on our side? Are they not? Should we try to be Makari of them? Should we not? Should we accept their help? Should we not? And we don't know the answers. And suddenly this time period of Shivat Tzion is about a time of ambiguity. And this time of Bayit Sheni is about learning to live with this ambiguity and perhaps even embrace the ambiguity and realize that the ambiguity can get you close to God also. And maybe it can get you even closer to God. Because remember that Shir Hamalo, who's better? The one who's completely active and waits for God to reach down to them, or the one who's passive and waits for God to reach down to them, or the one who's active and tries to reach out to God? And I read this really fascinating interview. It was an interview with Goodman, who's an Israeli intellectual. And the interviewer was asking him, about the American Jewish community and the Israeli community. And he said that something that I found so fascinating. And he said, he quoted Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who said that Israeli Jews are the chosen people and the diaspora Jews are the choosing people. And he explained, and he said, when you live in Israel, you're just Jewish. Like it's Jewish in the air. You could hate Judaism, but you're still seeing Chag Sameach on your buses and listening to Hanukkah music. And you have, your national holiday is Tu B'Shvat. And he said, it's like it doesn't matter. You're reading Judaism, you're inhaling Judaism passively. It's in the air. It's all Jewish and it's all for free. You don't choose it, it chooses you. And he says, now in the United States, in the diaspora, if you don't work really hard to choose it, you lose it. Because the language is not Hebrew and your friends are not necessarily Jewish and the calendar is definitely not Jewish, meaning we all, growing up in America, know all the Christmas songs. I mean, you can't get away from them. And our holidays are not Jewish. We have to take off on our holidays and it's hard. You have to navigate the vacation days. So you have to make an effort. You have to be choosing Jews. And I think perhaps the message of Shivat Tzion is really that we need both. That we need to be chosen Jews and we need to be choosing Jews. And it depends what Hashem wants from us at that time. And there's something beautiful about being in Eretz Yisrael and being chosen, but the people in Eretz Yisrael at this time also had to be choosing. And they had to make their Judaism their own. And they had to figure out a new system of life that didn't include the miracles, that didn't include the nevuah, the prophecy that wasn't clear, where the way forward was not the way it was before. They had to learn a new system and they had to be open to that. And sometimes in our lives every day, we need to learn new systems. There are certain things that we think are going to work out in a certain way and then they don't. Not just having a special needs child, but anyone who has any children know that it doesn't always work out the way you think it's going to work out. And life is a series of ups and downs and roller coasters. And perhaps what this time period teaches us is that our guiding principle needs to be, let's read this Shir Hamalot and just realize, is Hashem reaching out to us? Or is this a time where we need to be reaching out to Hashem? Is our way forward clear? Is our way forward ambiguous? What do we have at our disposal to make ourselves and our lives better? Because at the time of Shivat Tzion, a lot of the Jews missed the moment to go back to Eretz Yisrael because they were waiting for something better. And we need to take instruction from that and to say, you know what? We're not going to wait for something better. We're going to make something better. And sometimes things will come to us, but sometimes they won't. And with that, I would like we're going to end the time period of Zerubbabel with thanks to the writers, to Ezra, for giving us a gift of a Sefer in Tanakh that sounds just like our lives. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I'd love to hear your reflections, your questions, but it doesn't have to be a question. I'd love to also hear your thoughts if Rabbi Cohn says that we have time for that.
Thank
Of course we have time. Yesher Koach. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Presentation was great. It was great. So yeah, if people have questions, we have a few more minutes or comments. They're stunned. They're stunned.
We're wowed.
A lot to think about, and it's funny.
It is extremely timely, as you said, that's for sure. I mean, not only with Yom HaShoah, your grandmother should live and be well, for sure. And, the ability to bounce back from Churban and be able to seize the opportunity is very relevant in many, many ways. So I think you took a historic text and brought it home tonight. So thank you.
Rachel, the concept of holding two almost dissonant ideas in your head at the same time. It's something hafuchim. I can't remember what the Hebrew phrase for it is, but this is sort of it reminds us that just because this is our status quo, it doesn't have to stay our status quo.
100%. And my students ask me all the time, what's the third Beit HaMikdash going to be like? is it going to be like the first one or is it going to be like the second one? And my answer to them is, who knows that it's even going to be like either of them? Maybe there's going to be a new model that we haven't thought of yet because we didn't have it yet. Maybe it'll be like the first one. Maybe it'll be like the second one. And maybe it'll be like the third one.
It's evolving. You know,
Yeah.
see what's going to be. Talking about grandma, I only knew one puppy, lived with us, raising. I remember when Israel was established. She was a very quiet person. She said, remember this day that you and I lived to see the reestablishment of Eretz Yisrael. I remember the day, the clear skies, and the Jewish paper were printed in blue and white, you know, and blue
Wow.
print. I remember that very much. She made second Aliyah in 1907, long story.
Wow.
So as a widow with 3 children, but she's had a tough life. But the fact that the establishment of Israel occurred in her lifetime, wow. That I'll never forget exactly where and what she said to me. There's certain things that it just in my mind, I have that, just like your grandmother, remember incidents about her family. And unfortunately, since 3 of my grandparents died in pogroms, I don't know what they thought about in their times. Now, what I'm doing, I'm doing something which I'm putting on a cloud, not so much for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, because my husband and I lived through the 20th century. So it impacted us, communism, Nazism, McCarthyism, all those things. And I wanted them to know exactly how we dealt with it and how it reflected in our life. I was a history major in college, so I tend to look at that things. I only wish I was able to hear my great-grandparents, what their thoughts were and things. It's a void, which is, it's empty. And it's very hard for me. I don't have pictures of 3 of my grandparents. It's very difficult. So I could understand what your grandmother went through and the memories and so forth. Cherish her and everything it is. It's they're very special people and they live through difficulty. So but we Jews tend to survive. And with faith in Hashem, you'd be surprised, and we always question things, I mean, if you read anything, they have an opinion. There's 10 different rabbis giving an opinion about the same subject. In other words, opinions are good. It's important to have different opinions about any subject. Okay, I mean.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah.
That's
Shem speaking a lot. Thank you.
Just
Yeah.
one comment.
Yeah.
I don't understand how people could think about going back to the way it was in the first Beis Hamikdash. When I read the Torah portions about the avoda and about the karbanot, I just don't think we could go back to that. Just that's my feeling.
Meaning in terms of the animal sacrifices?
Right. Just the whole general, that part of it. It's mostly the animal sacrifices. And there's a lot in the Torah, about that. And very detailed, very, very detailed and very difficult.
So I've actually spoken about this. If you want to go online, I actually just put out 2 podcasts about that exact topic, one on Vayikra and one on Tzav. See if you want, you can search my name, and I spoke about that. But just in a nutshell, I think that that first of all, I don't know that we will. There definitely are opinions that say that we won't, but they're minority opinions. I think the Ramban, who's quite a sage, and I think Rav Kook, maybe the Rav Kook's Rabbi Cohen will correct me if I'm wrong. But those are minority opinions. I imagine most opinions think that we would, but just the concept of korbanot in terms of an aesthetic experience of reaching out to God. We are so in our heads now because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. We have no physical intimacy with Hashem. And that's to our detriment, I think. Everything has to happen up here in our brains. And could you imagine doing a sin and then coming and bringing an animal that you paid for that was expensive and touching the animal and saying, I really should be sacrificing myself to God for what I did, but I can't because God told me not to, so I won't, and I'll never sacrifice a human, but I'm going to touch this animal and then I'm going to sacrifice the animal to God. Could you imagine what an impression that makes on a person? Do you think they're going to be so quick to do the sin again? It's a real expression of sorrow and contrition. Even giving an adava, even giving a donation, not when you did a sin. You touch the animal and you say, this should be me. I want to give myself to God. I can't. So I'm going to do the next best thing. But we don't have the ability to have that kind of passionate, intimate, visceral, aesthetic experience in our lives now because we don't have the korbanot. So I wonder, we think about it because we're not used to it and we think like, how could we hurt the animals? I think this concept of sacrifice and offering is something that we're missing out on, and that could really lead to a different kind of relationship.
But were there no korbanot at all in the second temple?
Oh, there were, of course.
There were.
It's just that we read about it in the Torah, so we know explicitly what it was like. But I think the closest we come to today is slugging kaparas, and and it was kind of distasteful to many people to do that. So I don't agree with you that it's a touchy-feely way to get close to Hashem. It's not. What?
Send me the podcast and I'll forward it to Phyllis, and then she'll really have something to say. But send it to me. But it's a good conversation. I want Toby had a comment, and then we'll close it up for tonight. Toby.
Not a comment, just really a question. Going back to Rabbi Sacks's distinction between the chosen people and the choosing people. Mm-hmm. So in his formulation or in his mind, is choosing not to go ever okay? Is there only one right choice?
I'm not an expert in the theology of Rabbi Sacks, but that doesn't sound like him to me.
No. So where are we? Where are we on that? Or that's going to be by the end of the whole series.
I think that this topic is supposed to get us to ask that question. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's no easy answer. And I think it's something that, as Jews of the diaspora, we're supposed to grapple with that. And my opinion is not worth in this question really that much more than anybody else's. Definitely probably worth a lot less. I'd love to hear what Rabbi Cohen has to say. But this concept of, our role as Jews and religious Jews in the diaspora, Rabbi Sacks is saying we have a role. Like, we're not less than. We have a different role. But I wonder if each person on their own, that's something that, we're supposed to constantly grapple with. Not one time, and I made my decision, and I live in America, and that's fine. But over and over in our lives, something that we have to think through. And I'm not saying we have to justify it to ourselves. I don't think we should live like that with the guilt, but we should have a mission and a purpose and a way to be coming closer to God from where we are. But these books and this time period definitely give us pause, and I think they should. We don't want to be on the wrong side of history. But I'd love to hear what you have to say, and I'd love to hear what Rabbi Cohen has to say on this question. it's such an important question. I'm so glad that you brought it up.
One last comment. I know it's late, but in relation to what you said, I think it's important to look back at the text really when the 2.5 tribes said to Moshe Rabbeinu that we don't want to go into the land of Israel. And Moshe Rabbeinu said to them that if you're going to be on the outside, you have to be the chalutzim. You still have to remember that you're pioneers and that you're committed. And as Rabbi Rakefet said to me many years ago when we were in Israel early on, he said, just you can sleep in America, but don't sleep at ease. You know what I'm saying? In other words, if you're there, have a mission and don't just dwell here as if this is where it's always going to be. And I think we do have to walk in two worlds, and not everybody can live in Israel, but if we're living outside, there still should be this yearning, this struggle for, if I'm going to be here, I still have to do whatever I can to support the vision of Israel, the people in Israel, and kind of live both, as I said before, like in two worlds. It's a longer, there's a lot to talk about here. We could do a long series, but I don't want to hold you anymore. But thank you so much for teaching Torah tonight, and we look forward to God willing to continuing the conversation next week. I'm going to send out a recording of this. It'll be in the bulletin this week if people want to see it, and also I'll send out the podcast, Rachel, to the community as well on the topic that Phyllis raised too. So thank you so much.
Rachel, what is the topic title for next week?
So next week we're going to talk about, actually this is fascinating, but they end up getting Nevi'im kind of out of the blue. Nobody really expected them. And how did these three Nevi'im, Haggai and Zechariah, maybe a little bit of Malachi, I think we'll do Malachi a different week, but how do Haggai and Zechariah move the community forward? Because we're leaving them in a pretty bad place. And Haggai and Zechariah really come and they help the community move into the next stage. So that's our next topic, the two prophets.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great
Thank
night.
Thank you so much.
Shalom.
Have
Bye.
a good night, everyone. Thank you so
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.